A single missing cattle record made the mail-order bride freeze, and moments later, the rugged cowboy was staring at the same page. The ranch office fell silent as a stack of ledgers slid from Loretta's hands onto the floor. Outside, a loose gate slammed against its post in the Wyoming wind. Dust drifted through the doorway, while Cade Morgan stood motionless, his eyes fixed on one line buried deep in the records. Neither spoke. Neither looked away. Because whatever that number meant, it had already begun pulling them towards something either of them had expected. If you enjoy Western love stories with mystery, stay with us and tell us where you're watching from. The stagecoach rolled into Powder Basin beneath a sky the color of old copper. Dust drifted across the road in thin sheets, pushed by a dry Wyoming wind that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Loretta Hayes sat still until the wheels stopped turning. For months, she had imagined this moment. A gentleman waiting beside the station, a clean coat, polished boots, a careful smile. The letters had been thoughtful, respectful, the handwriting steady. She had read them so many times that she could almost hear the writer's voice. Then she stepped down from the coach and saw Cade Morgan. He stood beside a hitching rail near a stack of feed sacks. Tall, broad-shouldered, dust covered his coat from collar to hem. Mud clung to his boots. A faded hat shaded a weathered face marked by a pale scar running along his jaw. For a moment, Loretta wondered if the real Cade Morgan was running late. The cowboy pushed away from the rail and removed his hat. "Miss Hayes?" His voice was low and rough. "Yes." A brief silence followed. The wind rattled a loose sign above the freight office. "I'm Cade Morgan." That was all. No grand welcome, no flowers, no speech. Just the truth standing in front of her. Loretta adjusted her gloves and forced a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you." Cade nodded once. He picked up her suitcase before she could protest. "Long ride?" "Yes." "You hungry?" "A little." Another nod. That seemed to be the entire conversation. The wagon ride to Broken Ridge Ranch took nearly an hour. The Bighorn Mountains sat blue and distant against the horizon. Dry grass stretched endlessly across the basin. Cattle moved like dark specks beneath the afternoon sun. Loretta tried several times to start a conversation. Each answer Cade gave was honest but short. The silence between them never felt rude, only unfamiliar. When the ranch finally appeared, she saw weathered fences, a red barn, several corrals, and a ranch house sitting against the open land. It was not elegant. It was real. As evening settled across the valley, Cade showed her a small room on the second floor. "Bed's new," he said. "Window sticks sometimes." Then he hesitated. "If you need anything, holler." Before she could answer, he was already heading downstairs. Loretta sat on the edge of the bed and stared out at the fading light. This was not the man she had imagined, not even close. Yet something about him lingered. Not his words, his actions. Just after dark, clouds rolled across the mountains. Thunder echoed through the basin. Rain began tapping against the roof. Unable to sleep, Loretta crossed the room to close the window. Then she noticed something. Fresh wood, new nails, a recently repaired frame. Someone had spent time fixing the draft that once leaked through the cracks. She stepped closer. The repair had been made only hours earlier. A faint smile touched her face. Down below, through the rain-streaked glass, she spotted Cade crossing the yard with a lantern in one hand. He paused to secure a loose gate before the storm grew stronger. No audience, no praise, just another task that needed doing. The next morning, while the ranch slowly woke around her, Loretta carried a cup of coffee into the office beside the main house. Ledgers sat stacked on a shelf. Invoices, shipping receipts, freight records. Old habits drew her closer. She opened one of the books and turned a page, then another. Her eyes stopped on a number, She checked it again. The shipment total and the recorded payment didn't match. Only a small difference. Easy to overlook. Yet something about it felt wrong. Outside, a ranch bell rang across the yard. Loretta looked down at the ledger one more time. Then she slowly closed the book. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, her disappointment gave way to curiosity. Something at Broken Ridge Ranch wasn't adding up. Loretta closed the ledger and slid it back onto the shelf before anyone walked in. Outside, the ranch was waking. A cook banged a cast-iron pan in the kitchen. Horses shifted in the corral. Somewhere beyond the barn, a cowboy whistled while carrying water buckets. Everything looked ordinary. That bothered her more than if it hadn't. At breakfast, Cade sat across from her at the long table. A tin coffee cup rested beside his plate. He ate quietly. So did everyone else. Loretta noticed that nobody wasted food. Not a crumb. The drought had taught people habits they didn't even think about anymore. She waited until the others left. Then she reached into her pocket and unfolded a small scrap of paper where she had copied the numbers. "Can I ask you something?" Cade looked up. "Sure." "I found a shipping record this morning." His expression didn't change. "What about it?" "The payment doesn't match the delivery total." For a moment he simply watched her. Not suspicious. Not defensive. Just listening. "Which shipment?" Loretta handed him the note. He studied it, then folded the paper once and slipped it into his pocket. "You might be right." That surprised her. No argument, no dismissal, no suggestion that she didn't understand ranch business. Just a simple answer. "You'll let me check the books, if that's what you're asking." "It is," he nodded. "Then check them." That afternoon she carried several ledgers onto the office porch where the light was better. Dust floated through the warm air. The pages smelled faintly of ink and old paper. By sunset, she had found 3 more discrepancies. Small ones, the kind that disappeared inside large operations. Yet together they formed a pattern. A sack of feed here, a missing payment there, a livestock invoice adjusted by a few dollars. Nothing dramatic, but enough to matter. The next morning, Cade brought another stack of records without being asked. He set them beside her desk. "These too." Loretta looked up. "You're trusting me with a lot." His eyes drifted toward the ranch yard. "You know numbers. That was all." Yet somehow it felt like more. Over the following week, she settled into a rhythm. Mornings in the office, afternoons helping sort freight receipts, evenings reviewing invoices by lamplight. Slowly, she learned the names of people around the ranch. Some welcomed her, others watched from a distance. Among them was Vernon Pike, the ranch's warehouse manager, middle-aged, well-spoken, always carrying a clipboard beneath one arm. At first, he seemed helpful. Too helpful. Every time Loretta asked for records, Vernon appeared. Every time she found an inconsistency, he had an explanation ready. Weather delays, freight errors, clerical mistakes. One afternoon, she watched him from the office window. A wagon had arrived from town. The driver handed Vernon a folded document. Vernon glanced around before sliding it into his coat pocket. When he looked up, his eyes met Loretta's through the glass. The smile he offered never reached his eyes. That evening, she visited Martha Doyle's boarding house in town to deliver paperwork. The widow greeted her warmly and poured coffee into thick ceramic mugs. "You settling in all right?" "I'm trying." Martha smiled knowingly. "That ranch takes getting used to." Loretta looked out the window toward the dusty main street. "You know Vernon Pike?" The older woman's expression changed ever so slightly. "Everybody knows Vernon. Is he trustworthy?" Martha stirred her coffee. "I've learned that trustworthy people don't usually spend much time telling folks they are." The answer lingered in Loretta's mind all the way home. Days later, she discovered something larger. Much larger. A livestock shipment listed in the ranch records never appeared in the sales ledger. 42 head of cattle. Gone. No payment. No buyer listed. No explanation. Loretta checked twice, then 3 times. The cattle had simply vanished from the paperwork. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't an accounting mistake anymore. This was theft. The next morning, she brought the records to the office. Before she could speak, raised voices echoed from outside. Cowboys gathered near the loading yard. Vernon stood in the center holding several documents. His voice carried clearly across the ranch. "We've got missing cattle and broken records." People stopped working. Heads turned. Loretta stepped onto the porch. Vernon lifted one sheet of paper. "And funny enough," he said loudly, "all these bookkeeping problems started showing up right after the new bride arrived." Silence spread across the yard. Cowboys exchanged glances. Someone looked toward Loretta. Then another. Then everyone. The papers in her hands suddenly felt heavier. Across the yard, Cade emerged from the barn. His gaze moved from Vernon to Loretta. Neither spoke. But for the first time since arriving at Broken Ridge Ranch, Loretta understood exactly how dangerous the truth could become. Every eye in the yard was now fixed on her. The wind pushed dust across the ground between the workers. Somewhere a loose chain knocked against a fence post. Nobody spoke. Then Cade stepped forward. Back to work. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The men slowly returned to their tasks. Wagons moved again. Horses shifted in the corrals. But the looks remained. Loretta could feel them long after the yard emptied. That evening, she sat alone on the ranch house porch, with a ledger balanced on her lap. The sun disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving the basin washed in pale gold. Cade came outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Loretta looked up. "Do you believe him?" Cade stared toward the pasture fence. "No." The answer came quickly, yet somehow it didn't make things easier, because belief and proof were not the same thing. The next few days dragged. Rumors spread through Powder Basin faster than freight deliveries. At the general store, conversations paused when Loretta entered. At church, she noticed people lowering their voices. Near the stagecoach station, she overheard 2 ranch wives discussing missing cattle. Neither said her name. Neither had to. Clara Boone seemed to be everywhere. Near the church steps, inside the mercantile, outside the post office. Always talking, always planting another seed. By the end of the week, even Eli Morgan had grown distant. One afternoon, Loretta found him checking inventory records inside the warehouse. He barely looked at her. "Anything missing?" she asked. Eli shrugged. "Depends who's counting." The words landed harder than he probably intended. Loretta returned to the office without responding. That night, she worked by lamplight until nearly midnight. Bills, receipts, freight manifests. She spread everything across the desk. The evidence was there. She knew it. Yet every trail seemed to end just before reaching Vernon, as if someone had carefully swept away the final footprints. Then came the meeting. Every department head sat around the long table inside the ranch office. Vernon arrived carrying a thick folder. Sheriff Ben Walker attended as an observer. Even Eli was there. The room felt smaller than usual, hotter. Vernon spoke first. Calm, prepared. He presented records, witness statements, missing inventory reports. Each document pointed in one direction, toward Loretta. She listened without interruption. When her turn came, she stood, placed her own records on the table, and explained exactly what she had found. No speeches, no anger. Just facts. For a brief moment, the room grew quiet. Then Vernon opened another folder. More documents, more signatures, more explanations. Every inconsistency she had discovered suddenly seemed accounted for. Loretta stared at the papers. Something was wrong. She could feel it, but she couldn't prove it. Not yet. The meeting ended without resolution. People filed out. No one met her eyes. Outside, dusk settled across Broken Ridge Ranch. The lanterns were being lit one by one. Loretta climbed the stairs to her room. She closed the door, opened her suitcase, and began folding her clothes: a blue dress, 2 work blouses, a worn Bible, the letters Cade had once written. By midnight, everything was packed. The room looked almost empty. Loretta sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the wind outside. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she had no plan left, only one decision. Before dawn, she would leave Broken Ridge Ranch, and this time, she wasn't sure anyone would try to stop her. The ranch house was silent when Loretta carried her suitcase downstairs. A gray light rested over the basin. The sky had not fully decided whether it was night or morning. She left a short note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for your kindness. Nothing more. No accusations, no explanations." Outside, her horse waited beside the hitching rail. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush. Loretta mounted and turned north. She did not look back. For several miles, she followed an old trail that wound between dry hills and scattered pines. The farther she rode from Broken Ridge Ranch, the quieter the world became. By midday, she reached Red Hawk Canyon. The cliffs rose on both sides in layers of red stone. A narrow stream cut through the canyon floor, fed by a hidden spring farther upstream. Loretta left her horse beneath a cottonwood tree. Then she walked. The sound of water grew louder. At last she found the spring. Clear water spilled over smooth rock into a small pool shaded by pines. No freight ledgers, no ranch meetings, no suspicious glances. Only wind and water. She sat on a flat stone and removed her gloves. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to stop thinking. The silence felt strange, almost painful. Then footsteps echoed softly against the canyon walls. Loretta turned. Cade Morgan stood several yards away. Dust covered his coat. His horse waited farther down the trail. Neither spoke. The stream continued flowing between them. Finally, Cade stepped forward and placed a worn leather satchel on the rock beside her. "I figured you'd come here." Loretta looked at the satchel. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside were receipts, freight records, warehouse inventories, letters, pages covered in notes written in Cade's careful hand. Loretta slowly turned through them. Her eyes widened. The dates stretched back months, some nearly a year. "You've been investigating Vernon." Cade nodded. "For a long time." "Then why didn't you say anything?" His gaze settled on the water. "Because I couldn't prove it." Loretta stared at the documents. The missing feed, the vanished cattle, the altered invoices. The pattern was all there. For the first time, she realized something that made her chest tighten. Cade had never doubted her. Not once. He had simply been waiting for evidence strong enough to survive scrutiny. The anger she had carried for days began to loosen. Not disappear, just loosen. "You should have told me." "I know." The apology was quiet, honest, nothing more. Loretta looked down at the papers again. Then she froze. One receipt did not belong with the others. A warehouse payment signed by a merchant from town, a large merchant, one of the wealthiest men in Powder Basin. She read the name twice, then looked up. Vernon's not doing this alone. Cade's expression hardened. "No. The money's too large. It always was." The spring continued flowing through the canyon. For a long moment, neither spoke. The truth sitting between them felt heavier than any rumor, because now they understood what they were really facing. This wasn't theft by one desperate man. Someone powerful in town had been helping Vernon drain Broken Ridge Ranch for years, and together they had nearly succeeded. The ride back from Red Hawk Canyon felt different. Loretta no longer carried a suitcase. She carried answers. The wind moved across the basin in long waves through the dry grass. Ahead of them, Broken Ridge Ranch stood beneath the afternoon sun exactly as it always had. Yet nothing was the same. By the following morning, Sheriff Ben Walker sat inside the ranch office surrounded by ledgers, receipts, freight invoices, and warehouse records spread across the long table. The investigation moved quickly once the missing pieces fell into place. Names matched signatures. Payments matched shipments that had never reached the ranch. Warehouse transfers connected Vernon Pike to a merchant who owned one of the largest supply businesses in Powder Basin. The theft had been happening for years. Not enough to draw attention all at once. Just enough to slowly weaken the ranch season after season. 3 days later, Cade called for a meeting. Every foreman arrived. Every ranch hand who could leave his duties came. Even townspeople gathered near the open windows. The room was packed. Loretta stood near the back wall. She wore a plain blue dress and held a folder against her chest. Vernon sat at the table looking confident. At least at first. Sheriff Walker spoke before anyone else. His voice was steady and precise. One document followed another. One payment after another. One shipment after another. The evidence stacked higher and higher. The room grew quieter with every page. Vernon's confidence disappeared first. Then his excuses. Then his words. By the end, he sat staring at the tabletop. No one rushed to defend him. The merchant who had worked beside him was arrested later that afternoon in town. Years of theft finally came into the light. When the meeting ended, nobody moved. People looked toward Loretta. The same people who had doubted her. The same people who had listened to rumors. The silence felt different now. Not hostile, not suspicious, just honest. Then Cade stood. He rested one hand on the back of a chair and looked around the room. I've got one more thing to say. Every eye turned toward him. Cade rarely spoke more than necessary. When he did, people listened. He looked at Loretta. Not for a moment. Not in passing. Directly. Then he addressed everyone. Broken Ridge Ranch is standing today because the right person refused to ignore what was wrong. Nobody interrupted. From this day forward, Loretta Hayes will oversee ranch finances, contracts, and freight operations. A murmur moved through the room. Cade didn't stop. This isn't because she's connected to me. His voice remained calm. It's because she's the most qualified person for the job. The room fell silent again. Loretta felt dozens of eyes on her, but this time it felt different than before. No accusations, no whispers, no judgment, just recognition. Then Cade said something nobody expected. Not even her. I choose her because she makes this ranch better than anyone else. The words settled into the room. Simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Loretta looked down for a moment. Not because she lacked confidence, because some things take a second to fully reach the heart. Across the room, Eli Morgan gave a small nod. Martha Doyle smiled quietly near the doorway. Even those who had doubted her seemed to understand what they were witnessing. Not protection. Respect. A year later, spring returned to Powder Basin. The drought had eased. New grass covered the hills. Broken Ridge Ranch had grown stronger than it had been in years. The books balanced. The freight routes expanded. The cattle herds increased. Late one afternoon, Loretta and Cade rode north toward Red Hawk Canyon. The horses followed the familiar trail beneath the shadow of the mountains. When they reached the hidden spring, both dismounted. The water still flowed over the same rocks. The same wind moved through the pines. Loretta sat beside the pool and listened. A year ago, she had arrived there carrying disappointment, confusion, and a packed suitcase. Today, she carried none of those things. Cade settled beside her. Neither felt the need to speak immediately. The silence between them had changed over time. It no longer felt uncertain. It felt like home. Loretta smiled as she watched sunlight dance across the water. "When I left Kansas City," she said softly, "I thought I was coming to meet a gentleman." Cade glanced over. A faint smile appeared beneath the brim of his hat. "You were disappointed." "Very." That earned the smallest laugh from him, the kind that appeared rarely and vanished quickly. Loretta looked toward the canyon walls, then back at the man sitting beside her. The rough coat, the scar along his jaw, the weathered hands, the quiet strength, everything she once thought she didn't want. "You know," she said, "I was wrong." Cade raised an eyebrow. "About what?" She smiled. "About the kind of man I needed." The breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water through the canyon. Neither hurried the moment. Neither needed to. Because some choices prove themselves over time, not through promises, not through speeches, but through every ordinary day afterward. As the sun lowered beyond the cliffs, Cade reached over and took her hand. Firm, steady, certain, the same way he had chosen her, and the same way she had chosen him. Together they sat beside the hidden spring, while evening settled over Red Hawk Canyon. No secrets, no rumors, no unfinished questions. Only the quiet certainty that sometimes the life we need arrives in a form we never expected. And sometimes the rugged cowboy turns out to be exactly the gentleman we were looking for all along. As the last light faded over Red Hawk Canyon, it wasn't the victory over Vernon that stayed with Loretta. It wasn't the ranch, the ledgers, or even the respect she had finally earned. It was the simple truth that someone had chosen to stand beside her when walking away would have been easier. And maybe that's where this story touches something familiar in all of us. Imagine yourself in Loretta's place, far from home, carrying hopes that didn't match reality, feeling misunderstood, wondering whether you still belong when the world seems to have already made up its mind about you. Most of us will face a season like that sooner or later. What matters is who remains when the dust settles. Sometimes healing doesn't come through grand speeches or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it arrives quietly through steady actions, patient trust, and the people who keep showing up day after day. The kind of love that grows from respect. The kind that stays when life becomes difficult. That may be the real gift hidden inside this story. Not that life becomes perfect, but that courage, trust, and genuine partnership can give even the hardest road a place worth walking toward. If this story meant something to you, tell us in the comments. What was the moment that stayed with you the most? And if you enjoy stories about resilience, second chances, quiet mysteries, and the kind of love that endures through every season, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you.